You're watching Buzz with Jess Lujan.
Good evening, Guam. I'm Jess Lujan. Welcome to this edition of The Buzz. Tonight, very exciting show. There was a housing symposium today, affordable housing symposium, that is. And one of the presenters, of course, a good friend of mine, Rich Jordberg. Rich is the managing director for Seaway Highlands, a development that soon to be coming here to Guam. Good evening, Rich. How you doing?
Good, Jess. How are you doing?
Real good. Welcome back to Guam.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, the housing symposium, and before we talk about, touch a little bit about the Seaway Highlands, we'll talk about that later on. Let's talk about this housing symposium. You're here to talk about, basically, the symposium was about affordable housing.
That's right.
You know, as I'm looking for a true definition of what gambling is, because supposedly Guam has no gambling.
Yep.
Gambling is illegal in Guam, but I look all over the place. There's cockfight, there's bingo, there's casino up in Tejan. So as I'm looking for the true definition of what gambling is, illegal versus not,
Yep.
can you define what affordable housing means to, you know, in particular to Guam and maybe in other destinations?
Sure. You know, technically it's always a percentage of income, so your housing costs relative to your income. But the reality is if a guy lives in a tent, he needs affordable housing, right? So then you sliding scale. It's not like a used car. You know, you can't have a cheap house. I mean, houses are going to cost some price based on your cost of materials and such. And because Guam is in a high wind district and earthquake prone, you've got to have concrete houses, so that makes it more difficult. So technically, you know, you can look at a percentage of a person's income, and if it's 50% or below, then you've got an affordable housing problem. The lower the percentage of income, the worse off the problem is. So Guam has a very serious problem. There have been some initiatives, and this housing symposium it's in its fifth year now. I've attended for the last 3 years. I think it's an excellent tool to bring together a lot of people to talk about various issues. They've got experts, off-island experts, talking about real specific issues, very technical, this affordable housing problem.
Sure. You know, and the reason why I wanted a definition for that, because we got quite a few housing projects here in Guam, ongoing and completed already at this point. And more housing projects are coming up. And when you're looking at affordability, when you're looking at price ranges, $250.
Yeah.
Now, you know, and sometimes it's labeled, of course, affordability. When you compare that to the average income based on per capita, Guam ranks pretty low. I mean, you know, when you compare, districts and the size of the community, and I'm going, well, wait a minute, because salaries are not really compatible to basically what affordability is on Guam.
You have a perfect storm. You got all kinds of problems. You've got the cost of construction is expensive. Today at the conference, I believe that the cost of living has increased 60% over the last, I believe it was the last 10 years, though wages have only increased by 28%. So the problem is it's gotten worse and worse and worse through time.
Sure.
And the reality is the home prices have dropped. They're from $200,000 down to $185,000 on average from last year, from 2011 to 2012. But that's just a temporary issue. You know, and between 1990 to 2000, you had about 22,000 people, population change in Guam. And then from 2000 to 2010, you only had 4,000 people added. So you may see home prices dropping, but if you add 20,000 people, the problems that you're talking about now, they're going to be much worse in the future. You know, Hawaii median household price is $770,000. Here we're talking $180,000. Yet you still have some of the same constraints. Even worse, here you have a third of the land is privately owned, a third military owned, and a third is owned by government of Guam. So you only have a third of the property on the island to really deal with for housing development.
Well, again, as a developer, not just one who's looking to develop properties here, but as a developer back in the U.S. mainland as well. When you're looking to develop and again, to be able to sell your homes, or whatever it is you're building, whether you're going vertical or horizontal, you must look at who you're going to be selling to. And again, whether or not they're going to be able to get loans from banks. I mean, the problem the problem with the U.S. mainland in the past, and that's why, you know, the federal government had to bail out banks basically because they were pretty liberal in lending. We did not have that problem here in Guam. Federal government did not have to bail our banking institutions here in Guam because they were more conservative.
Right.
I mean, they definitely said, oh, wait a minute, you know, we can't now qualify you, whereas 2 years ago you couldn't qualify. We couldn't now qualify you unless you were able to be qualified based on maybe higher income, or you've gotten rid of you know, blemishes in again, you know, your portfolio pretty much.
Yeah.
But that's what happened in the United States. Here in Guam, the same thing. It continues to be conservative. How again does this one avail themselves to institutions?
You've got to have a rich uncle. I mean, really, it's like, okay, let's say you work at Tony Roma's, right? That's job number one.
Okay.
Then you work at the Hyatt El Dente. That's job number two. That's still not enough income to get, you know, to qualify for one person. Maybe you have to have 2 families with 3 jobs each, or two people per family, a husband, wife, 6 jobs to handle 2 kids. And that might give you enough to qualify if you're working at the basic service level. It's really, you know, Jess, it's first problem is not about affordability, it's about employment and economics. It's a job problem first, right? The first thing to do to fix affordability is to increase incomes, because a $180,000 house shouldn't be that big of a problem, right? But the service sector isn't paid very well, right? And it's kind of not too many people. There's, you know, number of people that have service jobs is a lot of people. There's government jobs, there's service jobs, and there's a small, narrow, I'd say the high-end service jobs, you know, the lawyers, attorneys, accountants and such. They all have decent incomes and such. They're all taken care of. It's the middle class. It's the middle class. It's the lower class that really should be middle class. It's just not moving, not budging from there. And you know, again, you know, I mean, I applaud the governor in regards to looking at these connection fees, these fees for utilities and all that, and saying, hey, look, these extra monies. I mean, I you know, in one sense, you're saying, you know, the CCU says, well, they've got to pay this. It's not fair. Well, in the very beginning, in government, I mean, you know, our house, we didn't have to pay for that. You know, and so if you're going to make it fair, you got to charge it to everybody. Why is it just the newcomers at this point? But again, it really hurts the folks that you're talking about that are in the service industry, getting, you know, only maybe 1 job, 2 or maybe even 3, and barely qualifying for that. You know, imagine having to shed out $6,000 for a connection fee. I mean, that's normally part of money that will go to a down payment to show the bank again, you know, that you're employable, you have some savings, that you can have a 20, 25, 30-year mortgage. So you know, it's that amount of money can just kill the deal pretty much. Makes a difference. Can make it. And you know, the worst part about it from the developer side, that's the smallest part, because last year's conference they kind of added up all the different costs, and it was really closer to $37,000 to $40,000 is the true cost of servicing one house for all the utilities, if you include the cost of replacing and sinking for like a replacement for the whole project. So the $5,600 is really a deal. And the worst part is, so
there we go.
You know,
I tell you what, more about this when we come back from the break. Okay, be right back.
This program